Aloha, you're listening to Chad Ford's NBA Big Board on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've got the ringers, Kyle Mann, with me today. We're going to talk top of the draft, our guys that we like, we don't like. We're going to disagree a little bit about top prospects in the draft, but we really want to dive in as March Madness is coming. Really want to dive in. Who are the top prospects in 2022 NBA draft? Here we go. All right, we're back with the ringers, Kyle Mann. Hey, thanks for coming on the show.
Man, thank you for having me. Like I was telling you, we were talking off the air. It's like I've consumed your stuff for a long time. I'm not trying to make you feel old, but yeah, you were somebody. This is something I've always consumed, and you were somebody that like just you were early on the scene, man, and did a great job, and honestly, probably stoked my interest in it. So I've appreciated you for all these years.
I appreciate that, and it does make me feel a little bit old. The gray's coming into the beard now, and it is weird. Like when you've done this as long as I've done it, um, it just becomes part of you and how you think, and it's such an interesting thing. Like I'll always love the draft, and always love having conversations with folks, and really appreciate the work that you've done. I was blown away, by the way, by the Jabari Smith piece that you did. Man, it's probably been like what, about a month now?
Yeah, I think I did it in December. I think it was
Yeah,
before conference play, but I appreciate that. Really, that compliment you
yeah.
gave me meant a lot to me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and and one of the things that you and your generation's been doing with a video breakdown and being able to really dive in, to players, I think is just one of the coolest things that's really come out of the draft lately. And we've got Rafael Barlow. If you're wondering where Rafael Barlow is, he's stuck in a layover in Istanbul right now. There's a snowstorm in Istanbul, so that's where Rafael Barlow was doing some international scouting for us. So I really appreciate you coming in and filling in this week and talking about the draft. What I want to do today is just have a discussion with you. I always love bringing in people because there's no consensus number one guy really. I actually push against that a little bit because it feels like the NBA is getting there with Jabari Smith, but I certainly know there's strong Chet Holmgren people, there's strong Paolo Banchero people, there's even some Jaden Ivey, folks sort of hanging around the fringes right now. So let's just start at the top. You've watched these guys really carefully. Do you have a guy right now that just personally you're like, this guy should be the number one pick in the draft?
This has been one of those. And I almost feel like when I'm watching these top three, kind of the consensus guys at the top, as they've sort of jockeyed and jostled for position, I've almost felt like we're watching one of those like jumbotron races at a game where you're just
Mm,
like, okay, that guy's it's like they
yeah.
keep flipping spots. This is like somebody tweeted the other day that scouting is a living document, and a lot of times we act like once we get to a certain point in their career, it's like they're done, but that's just not the way it is. Like this is one point in like the value cycle where they're assessed. And for me right now, I've kind of gone. I co-host a show with Jonathan Sharks, who is brilliant basketball guy, but we've kind of gone back and forth about Paolo and Jabari. I used to be like when Paolo was in high school, I was pretty enamored with him. I was like, I didn't really have many nitpicks for him, but I've kind
Mm,
of come to the point where I've studied this draft. I always say it's kind of like a philosophical fault line kind of a thing where we're like, okay, does the number one pick need to be a primary guy? Does he need to be a primary offensive number one or a defensive number one, like the primary guy? And if a player who is maybe not a primary but they're extremely efficient at what they do at a high level, should that player go ahead of them? Like, does a primary always need to go first? And I've kind of been circling Chet for a while to the point where I'm looking at the things that Chet provides. I'm looking at the limitate and measuring that against the limitations of Jabari and what I think Paolo's ceiling is. I feel like the floor for Chet Holmgren is pretty high, and I feel like Jabari's floor is also pretty high. I am in the Chet camp right now. Long way of saying that.
okay.
I kind of feel like Chet Holmgren is going to be a very good NBA player with an extremely broad skill set.
Well, this is a great way to kick it off. Chet started the year for me at one. He's number 2 on my latest big board right now. Jabari passed him, I think, in big board 3.0. So whenever that was, December, January update, I can't quite remember. I can't keep track of these anymore. Is when Jabari passed him for me. I've been doing this a long time, and it feels like most players that I scout anymore, I have a good feeling of other sort of comps and other types of players. I don't really like the exact player comps, but I like taking strands of different guys or whatever. I think he's the most unique guy that 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 I've scouted. I don't know. I to this day, so I'll be really curious who you've got or who you're thinking. Like, I don't know who to say, okay, if you think about Chet in the league in 3 to 5 years, here's some players that you could look at that he could have a career like, and maybe like a high hit, a middle hit, and then a low hit. I think this is the hesitation. I mean, you look at the analytics. I think Chet's gonna win the day, right? On most sort of analytics boards, Chet's gonna win the day. If you just look at 7'1" guy who can do all the things that Chet can do, both offensively and defensively, it's clear it's there. I think it's the 190 pounds
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit the age. He is a bit older for a freshman. I think he's already 20. So he's a little bit older. That makes a difference for some scouts or whatever. But I think the hardest thing is who is he at the next level? And here's going to be, because I hate comparing guys to like Hall of Famers and things like that. It's really really hard. But the only guy that I see some similarities to is Kevin Garnett,
Hmm.
um, to me. And part of it is the skinny frame, but the skill set plus the toughness. I mean, whatever you want to say about Kevin Garnett, like the toughness, it belied whatever sort of frame that he had. He never really bulked up and got huge in the NBA, but his toughness, his motor, and one thing you'll say about Chet is he doesn't back down from anybody. He goes at it so hard. He looks frail, but whatever he's got inside is far from frail.
Yeah, I think the size thing, the age thing, I think is a case by case basis. For him, I don't, if someone is like physically dominant, and I'm kind of looking at what like the growth, I always say growth plate on their game.
Yeah.
Like I don't necessarily worry so much about Chet. I think you're right with the analytics. I mentioned this stat the other day that, in college, I think like low wastefulness in your game is important. But like I brought this up that players in college ball since like 2008 that have had a true shooting above 65 and an assist percentage above 10% and a block percentage above 10%. It's Brandon Clark, Joel Embiid, and then Kenny George, the the big guy that played for UNC Asheville, and then Chet. So I mean, it's pretty incredible, like efficiency company. I don't. I think you have to ask yourself that question now. What is he going to be offensively? Also the size thing. I've asked some people like that I know that are like into like the sports science world. Do we have any kind of comparison for how big these guys are? How like what can we see? That stuff is hard. I don't know. I don't. It's hard to like land there and just say I don't know. But I feel like um, he's going to be a good passer. I think he's a better defender than people give him credit for. Even like I think he's very smart positionally and just kind of like swallows people up. Um, the size thing and the weight thing and the strength thing are going to be sort of hinging, because if we weren't worrying about those things, I think he's number one. Like I don't really feel like I would
Oh,
even have much of a
no question.
yeah,
Consensus number one, far and away. Just
yeah,
if we just looked at his production and we just took the weight thing out of it, like, and you just said, okay, there's a 7-footer. Here's what the 7-footer's doing. Let me just sort of lay out. You don't get to see him, but here's the statistical case for what this guy's doing. Like, I think everybody would check that box and say that's the guy that goes, number one in the draft. And
yeah.
then it's 190 and seeing the awkwardness, seeing him fall down 15, 16 times a game. Every you start to say, well, how does that look? And Poku was kind of like that, as far as like body type or whatever. And the jury's still out on him and what he's going to be, but he didn't have the success level that Chet has had, early on. What I guess my question is, who do you got a comp for him? Do you got somebody that you're kind of thinking like this is who he could be?
He's really unique. I think we could just go line by line here. I mean, I think that the shooting thing is interesting and important too, because sometimes we can fall in love with the idea of what somebody can do, like in an empty gym. Every year we'll see people, in workouts making. I always laugh because like that if you really are around like good players, NBA players, like people went nuts when that Klay Thompson video came out when he made 25 in a row. I was like, I know people like that. That's not that crazy, but I mean,
I've got video of Ben Simmons at pre-draft in Cleveland sinking threes. He and DeJounte Murray like just trading threes back and forth all over and then you say, well, maybe he can shoot. It was in a gym with a trainer, right? And Ben Simmons took more threes in that workout session than he's done his entire career. So
yeah, the filter I think for some skill sets is like the speed of the game, and I don't think that you can really. I've never played an NBA game. I'm not going to act like I can like preach at people and hit them over the head. But if you stand near an NBA game, the speed of it is the filter for like what skills are functional. So if you look at
mm,
Chet, his shooting, I'm not so sure. Like, I mean, his shot looks good if we're just breaking down on that. It seems like he like back rims a lot. I don't know. It seemed like he's been more of a hypothetical shooter than I've liked, but he's a good finisher. He doesn't really get buried around the basket as much as I would like. He can push it in transition. I've always enjoyed that, and he
yeah.
can once he gets, and I'll see him getting pushed off of his straight line sometimes when he's dribbling in transition and he gets around that foul line area. People can kind of get him off balance. Once he gets a little more power in his lower body, he can start to like power through and get to the rim, things like that. But the comp thing, um, that's the type of player that he fits for me, is like defensive anchor. And then he can maybe doesn't necessarily have to be like a scoring primary. He can give you like passing in the middle, be kind of like a connective playmaker. Like you throw it to him at the elbow, he can hit cutters. If he can be like a catch and shoot guy, he's sort of like a more actualized version of like Porzingis, honestly.
Mhm.
Because the Garnett thing is like so hard because it's like you're talking about elite generational defensive impact, and I feel like Garnett was a little more of a twitchy, tighter, kind of had that like sports car athleticism, whereas Chet has
Mhm.
these limbs that just kind of like catch they catch more wind resistance. It almost seems like he's not
Yeah.
quite as tight of an athlete, I feel like, as Garnett.
No, I think that's right, and I think that's why I wouldn't put if I thought it was Kevin Garnett, he would also be clearly the number one guy on my
That's
board, right? Like,
true, yeah.
it's something else. I'm curious, who did you have one on your board last year? Do you remember?
Oh, Cade all the way. Yeah, I've
Hey,
been, and maybe I did some maybe there was some blind spot with that, but I had been on, I've been watching Cade for quite some time, even
mm,
pre-college, and I discussed this a little bit in my writing and on the podcasting thing. I had an idea of him being like a heliocentric, like center of
mm,
an offense, and
mm.
could score and like at high volume create offense. I'm not so sure that he is that anymore, but I had Cade number one, and I still think that, I mean, he's playing better and better. So that's been an interesting kind of dialogue to monitor. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think Cade's played. I mean, if you take away the first month of the season where he didn't get training camp and he was coming back from injury and it was pretty awful. Like he's he's played to me up to what I thought we'd probably get from Cade the first year. I think the issue has been what Evan Mobley has shown uh, is now. I don't think it's that Cade's done anything wrong. I guess is my point. Like I think Cade is to me starting maybe not, but may end up being exactly the guy that we thought he was going to be in the NBA. It's just that I think that Mobley may now transcend that, and maybe Scotty Barnes will too. We'll see in a way that I think this is where the debate gets confusing. It's not that I think if people are saying that maybe it should have been Evan Mobley one or whatever that is a dig on Cade as much as it's that there's some upside there that we're seeing now. So I guess my question is the reason I asked that, would you take Chet over any of those guys, Mobley, Cade Cunningham, if they were all in the draft together? Would you take
Mm.
Chet over Cade over Mobley? I don't know if there's any other the rookies that you're really high on right now. It's been a really great rookie class, but
Oh yeah, I mean it's a fantastic rookie class. I mean I really love Josh Giddey. KOC was higher on him than I was. I had some of my like reservations. Something I might write about soon about like players. Their ceilings is something I've been kind of
mm,
refining and analyzing myself, like in my process. Like what am I? Because I've been a little conservative at times. But Yeah, I would say, I think that Mobley and Cade would be 1-2 again in this draft. I feel like their impact was pretty clear to me, as like I thought Cade could be a really good team defender and the things I said about his offense. But then Mobley, I had Mobley too, but I still had a lot of respect for him. And I thought that they could both be like top 10 to 20-ish players in the league, which is extremely high praise. And to get two of
Yeah,
those guys in one draft is wild, as you
yeah.
know. So yeah, I would say I wouldn't have Chet above either one of those two guys. But then once you get past two, you could start to have that conversation, I think.
Yeah, I think it just sort of, again, I like to kind of level set expectations around this draft compared to what we saw last year. I'm not sure that I have Jabari one, but I still think that I would for sure have, knowing what I know now. I wouldn't say this last year, but knowing what I know now, Mobley, I would take ahead of Jabari. Then Jabari gets in the conversation with me. I'm also a big Scotty Barnes guy, and
Me
and
too.
so I still see a really really high ceiling for Barnes in a way that intrigues me. Um, Look, let's talk about one of our sponsors, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the other guys for the number one pick. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now possible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Winder often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions, and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more the same parts at chain store or car dealership? Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. They have everything you could need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car and truck. Right, locked on in their "How did you hear about us" box, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Okay, so you got Chet one. Who's two?
This has been even tougher for me because lately, like I said, it's really close. Like this is the tightest 1, 2, 3 for me in a while. At the beginning of the year, I would have said Paolo, no hesitation, and then I was watching Jabari and getting blown away. And as you were talking about, like I wrote that long. I mean, I watched everything I possibly could. I was watching like his high school games, Jabari's high school games, everything I could get a hold of. For me, it's a question of I'm really confident about what Jabari is going to be in terms of like a really high quality rotation player. Like he's that good of a shooter at his size, doesn't need a lot of space, can create a shot without a dribble. He has that no dribble offensive game. For me, the star threshold is kind of the difference. And I'm just looking at Paolo and I'm saying, how confident am I about him tapping into that? I saw in your draft guide, you mentioned like Carmelo Anthony. I feel like Jabari is a little less of a jump shooter, but he's more of I see playmaking upside with him that makes me curious. And I've seen willingness to do it. So right now I'm leaning towards Paolo at 2, which may surprise you. So we'll differ there a little bit.
Yeah,
But it is tough because they're all three such good players. The other factor of this is that Jabari's, and I talk about this in that piece too, is like the bridge to becoming a star that can be like a playmaker, that can be like a guy who generates fouls, a guy that generates implosion of defenses and things like that and help. Those players typically have handle at that size. If you look at all of them,
yeah.
if you look at Paul George, if you look at Kevin Durant, that's elite company. Even Chris Middleton, handle is pretty critical. Right now, I'm not like he's not like a horrible liability of a ball handler, but I haven't seen enough of it to make me confident that he's going to be a star in that sense. So I'm leaning Paolo. That was a heck of an answer. I'm sorry, but I'm
Oh,
leaning Paolo.
it's a great answer, and I do think that that question is the Jabari question, right? Like he's going to be, I think pretty much everybody's confident he's going to be elite shot maker in the NBA, but can he put the ball on the floor? Can he create for himself? Is that handle going to tighten up? Because it's not there yet. You see him, and some finishing questions as well,
Mhm.
for him. I think that the thing that's on the NBA guy's side is like, here's a guy that we know is going to have an elite skill in the NBA, and we're really, really confident that this is going to be an elite thing. He's going to be an elite shooter, and given his size and the way that he rises up in that shot, it's very difficult to defend that at the next level. So if he starts to add, and I'd say the second thing that they really like about him is his competitiveness. This is also a guy who's not at all going to shy away from taking that shot once the ball in his hands at the end of the game. plays that way. So now it's just a sort of question of, will he add something else, right, to his game that really sort of takes the next level. And I also think the fact that Jabari has finished the season as strong as he's finished it, for Auburn, and starting to get more active on the defensive end as well. I think that argument's there where it's again sort of perceived ceilings for Banchero. Like, we know all of these things Banchero is going to do well, and it's going to quickly translate to the NBA. My guess is he, as a rookie, is probably likely going to look the best going in, just because he's going to have the physical strength to handle the NBA in ways that, Chet and Jabari, that's going to be a much bigger adjustment for them.
I think
But then
Jabari might end up being a better rookie, honestly, because I feel like the
Really?
shooting's going to translate immediately. I feel like it might be depending on where all this depends on where they go too, because some guys can go in and end up overburdened. Their skill set can be stretched beyond what it can handle, and he might be a little inefficient. But anyway, sorry to jump in there. But
No, that's actually a really fair point. And it'll be interesting. Does it become a Jalen Green situation where it gets overwhelmed? Though, look, Jalen Green's starting to play better, and that's good news for Houston, is that he's starting to play better. That's a really interesting question, and I do think that this is one of these drafts where occasionally we get a guy in the draft where, like, he's going to fit in any system. Like, teams are going to figure him out. Chet, to me, is so dependent on what an NBA head coach is going to decide. What am I going to do with Chet? How am I going to use Chet? There's like multiple options sort of out there. I think Detroit even was trying to figure that out with Cade Cunningham early on, and also was, part of the question. Evan Mobley, we kind of knew coming in. How is a coach going to use Evan Mobley? What's it going to look like? I think he landed on the perfect team for him in Cleveland, and the way they sort of built that team. But you could go in different directions, and maybe it doesn't look the same. And I think that's going to be true for all three of these guys coming in. What team he lands on, and how coaches. You have a favorite team for any of these guys? Like, if you're kind of looking at the teams that are going to be selecting, high in the lottery, is there like, man, I'd like to see Chet on this team, or I'd like to see Jabari on this team?
One thing that I was going to tack on to what you were saying is that I kind of feel like Chet's role malleability is one of the big selling points for him. Because I really could see him playing with. He can be a low pressure guy and still provide you a lot. And I think that's one of the selling points for him with Gonzaga, is he's been in a limited role and still had an insane impact. Like, if you think of him as like a vertical spacer, like Cade doesn't have a lob threat in Detroit right now. And he has honestly a roster that is just like not optimized to his skill set at all. And I think the more that we see them fill that roster out with the right types of players, you see this with Luka too. When you have that kind of like scorer playmaker type, you really need to do your best to give them options so they can be more efficient. But like, I could see it in Detroit. I could see Houston is really interesting for me, because I could see, his pairing with Timmy at Gonzaga is interesting, because Timmy is not a conduit for offense. Timmy is a spot where the offense goes to, and he either posts, scores, or doesn't. It's like, it's very much like it's not a flowing loop. And I could see him playing with like Şengün at the 4, and then you can play with Chet as a spacer, and you could play him, as a high post kind of player too. And I don't know. And then Oklahoma City, also another situation that would work, where you have
Poku and Chet in your front line together.
Poku is a guy.
Could you imagine Poku and Chet on the front line together? That's amazing.
I just want to see the photos of that. But Poku and Chet together is Poku is a source of ribbing and fandom at the Ringer. We love and get frustrated with Poku. But yeah, I mean, Jabari really similar. I think the most like conditional, like role conditional player is probably Paolo. I think Paolo, like we were talking about, he could really look good or rough depending on who he's paired with. Like, if you put him in a situation where you really need him to grow as a playmaker quickly, it could be a wasteful, ugly kind of beginning. I could see that. Yeah.
You like him in Oklahoma City, Banchero, playing with a couple of playmakers, Shea and Josh Giddey?
They, if they're gonna, OKC is just so up in the air in terms of what they are. I always joke about, like, when we start laughing about like fit with some of these teams that are at the top of the draft, and I'm always just like, fit is a word that implies you have an existing thing that works. So it's kind of like the thing with Cleveland, where they sometimes just take the best player, typically, is my opinion, and
Mm.
figure it out later. Because if you're worrying about fit with something that isn't just already working, you're going to set yourself up for problems. But I mean, Oklahoma City as they exist, they need shooting and playmaking in their front court badly, because they have a really dominant downhill guard with Shea, and then you have a guard that he doesn't exactly fit perfectly with Giddey. As much as I love them both, like I really enjoy them as players. Chet would work there. Paolo it's possible. Like but honestly, I don't know. I could see any of these guys kind of working in these spots. Like I don't see anything that's like glaringly that could be rough. Paolo with Orlando could be ugly. Like I'm not so sure about that one.
Wendell Carter, and yeah, like there's yeah.
Yeah, and you got guards that aren't exactly like pace, playing with great pace and playmaking and things like that. I want to see Paolo. That's something about Duke, I think, that is forcing him into all the Duke prospects. Honestly, they don't have sort of a central hub of like
Yeah.
controlling the flow of the game, and like they have a bunch of secondary creators and playmakers that are being forced into primary roles, and that can create for ugly basketball. Like I'm a Kentucky basketball fan, I know all about that. I've seen some really clunky, rough rosters, and that's what we're watching at Duke.
All right. Uh, so you answered that for Chet. I mean, you said those guys. Is there a place where you'd love to see Jabari? Is there a team that you're like, oh man, I think he'd really pop there?
He'd work in Houston and Detroit. I mean, Oklahoma City, I think, would be an incredible fit for Jabari,
Yeah.
based on what I was saying. Like you get a good defender, and you get somebody that can shoot the ball. I think that would be a good fit for them. Um, but he's pretty malleable too. I always joke, every team in the league, if you go around and say, "Hey, do you need spacing and size?" I always joke that it's like in school when someone would offer you a piece of gum, you're like, "Yeah, I'll take a piece of gum." That's like that's the way it is in the NBA. You always need spacing and size and shooting.
Is there anybody else, in your opinion, besides those three guys, that could be a dark horse for the number one pick or should be considered for the number one pick? Because I know there's this group think that starts to grow in every draft, right? It really around Cade, there was such a strong group think he's the absolute number one pick. Detroit fans freaked out before the draft if anybody mentioned anybody else other than Cade. Because that narrative became so strong, and we know that this is part of it, right? And that narrative is there with those three guys. As you're scouting and looking, is there anybody else that says, look, if we took away the narrative for a minute, this guy is done enough, or is talented enough, or has the ceiling where a team should legitimately consider him
There are a
at
couple
number one?
guys. Yeah, I think it's important, like what you were saying. It's important to have the negative. You need diversity of thought. I think we've seen. You can't. The consensus thing can be overwhelming sometimes, and it's good to have. As positives, we need negatives. That quote from Philip Seymour Hoffman, The Master. But I think that you could see star upside with Jaden Ivey. I've heard people say that. When you think about like his dribble separation, it's pretty special. I think he's probably got the best dribble separation probably in the draft off the
Yeah.
bounce, like at the guard spot. In terms of like going number one, sometimes I wonder if Jalen Duren is underrated. I wouldn't go number one. I've wondered if he could flirt with that like 4, 5, 6 range.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big wild card, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, is like, what do you think about Shaedon Sharpe? Because Shaedon
Yeah.
Sharpe is sitting there as a guy that you could maybe nab. You've taken him at number one, you're not really getting ahead of the game but I mean, if you could
Yeah.
take him a little bit lower, you might be getting a guy who is a number one talent potentially later in the draft. Those are two guys that come to mind. I don't see Griffin going that high. Johnny Davis, I like him, but I don't see him as a guy that I would spend the number one pick on. Those are just a few that kind of come to mind off
Yeah.
the top of my head.
Okay, so let's talk about Shaedon Sharpe for a minute. You know the Kentucky stuff well. Um, Obviously, he's going to get drafted without playing at Kentucky if he declares for the draft. I mean, right? Like, there's all these questions. Let's just throw the caveats out there. Like, he may not even declare for the draft. That's what his family's right now says he's coming back to Kentucky. Uh, I've been doing this a long time. The skeptic in me says guys that are going to be top 10 picks in the draft, and I think he's a lock for the top 10, don't go back to school. I mean, Blake
Right.
Griffin did it. There's a few people that have done it, but it's extremely rare thing. If he does declare, despite the reports that are out there, the NBA still has to rule on whether he's eligible for the draft or not. There's some evidence that he might be. There's some evidence that maybe he isn't. Ultimately, that will be a decision that the NBA will make about whether he's actually eligible for the draft or not. And they have not made that decision. I think a lot of people think that because some of the reports that came out there said he's eligible for the draft, that they've made the decision. They haven't. The NBA hasn't. But he has to declare first, and then if he declares, but let's say for a minute he goes ahead and says, you know what, this is too lucrative to pass on. I declare for the draft. The NBA says, okay, you're eligible for this draft. Teams won't have seen him play in games at Kentucky. He's playing in high school, but because of the pandemic and a lot of other things, there's a little bit more limited scouting profile than scouts would typically like. He has been engaged in practice, but is he
Mhm.
scrimmaging in practice?
As far as I know, he is.
Yeah.
That's what I've been told, that he's getting in there and playing with. I guess I don't know which unit he's playing with, but I've heard he's playing in practice. I could
So,
be
so
wrong
you're
about
getting a little bit of that, and then of course you'll have him in workouts. Though my guess is the way that most agents handle this, the chances of Shaedon Sharpe actually being in a competitive workout with another player are probably going to be slim.
that. Yeah.
My guess is that's how his agent's going to handle this. Is not, I'm not going to do anything to screw this up, and just sort of let this be, sight unseen and let him get in a gym. But based off of what you've seen and scouting him in high school and what you're hearing from Kentucky or whatever, what's the best case scenario for Shaedon Sharpe in the NBA?
You mean like his ceiling as a player? Is that
Yeah,
what you mean?
yeah, ceiling as a player. Yeah.
Uh, well, I mean, the elevator pitch, which is what I always go to for him, is you're getting a guy who's very explosive, has the build of like, I think he's probably more like 6'4", 6'5", maybe 6'4.5", with long arms, big hands. So he fits the mold of like a big scoring kind of. The combo word is scary, but he's that type of like elite scoring. He fits that mold. I think he's probably in that like 38 to 40-inch vertical range. He could be a big time scorer, but I have questions about him. Whenever I watch him, he strikes me as somebody that has like a workout game. Like when I watch some of these younger wings, I'll watch them, and you can see them kind of the basketball's played in like 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3 type situations, especially in the way actions run these days. It's not always even can he make a decision in a pick and roll. It's like, can he play a 3-on-3 game with spacers in the corner? I haven't seen a lot of that from him in terms of he is very like straight lines, beat my man, hit a three. So I don't even really know what type of playmaker he is because we watch him in EYBL and he's really trying to just cook his guy. And we had similar questions with Jalen Green, but these are different body types. He's built a little bit bigger. He's built like somebody that could become a pretty good on-ball defender in the NBA. If he's going to be an elite shot creator, if he's going to be somebody, but so many of these things are questions. I'd have a hard time taking him at number one because of that. But is he worth a gamble somewhere in there? I mean, he has star potential, to answer your question. He does have star potential, but the hypotheticals kind of loom in a way that makes me a little uneasy. Even at Kentucky, I'm a little higher on Cason Wallace right now, the guy that's coming into Kentucky right now, because I like, Nick Smith is another guy that I feel like I'm a little more sure about some of the things he does, but the hypotheticals of Shaedon Sharpe are very strong because he has a lot of tools. And that's something we talk a lot about. It's like, but
Yeah.
will those tools be functional?
Well, it's catnip for NBA scouts and general managers, right? Like when you watch these guys all year, you do get to this process, and we're starting to get there where at first it's kind of upside, then it starts to be nitpicking, then they get downright mean towards every prospect in the draft. This is, in the next month will be when every GM will be saying this is a terrible draft, everybody sucks. And then when you get into June, when you have to actually select a guy, then the psychology changes, and then every guy drafted in the first and second round has a chance to be a huge impact player for your team, right? Like,
Yeah.
you go through those sort of, because you have to talk yourself into whoever it is you're taking. But these guys are always the most dangerous because there isn't a lot of evidence to either direction, and so you can project whatever you want onto these players. And I think with Shaedon Sharpe, this is going to be one of the really unique cases of there isn't a lot of evidence that you're going to be able to gather one way or the other, and you're just going to have to follow your gut, and which teams will be disciplined and say, we don't know, have enough evidence. We're going to take a guy that we have more evidence on versus the person that says the little bit of evidence that is there
Yeah.
suggests star, and we're going to really roll the dice here and hope that he becomes one. I
And
would
that,
say this for Shaedon Sharpe,
yeah,
his biggest risk is going back to Kentucky by far. Like
Kentucky fans won't want to hear that, but it's true. Yeah,
for him personally, like
for sure.
he runs it, and we've seen this, right? I mean, this year's draft, Caleb Houston, Patrick Baldwin. I mean, we can go through the list of high school players that Peyton Watson that have had very and then internationally, Yannick Zosa, Usmani Jang,
Hamidou
who
Diallo
scout,
did it at Kentucky,
yeah,
came back and got nitpicked to where he might have gone a little higher. Yeah.
yeah. And so I mean, if I was advising his family, I would say if you're risk averse, this is actually the least risky path is to go into the draft right now. But there's good reasons to stay, and one of them is he doesn't feel he's ready, and that's been the narrative out of there is that he's not ready and he wants to improve and thinks that he can do that at Kentucky as opposed to being in the G League or, getting thrown into the Wolves with the Wolves at the NBA level, and that's a legitimate reason to go back to school. And now that you can get endorsements and everything else, maybe there's
That's what I
a
was
good
gonna say.
argument that, yeah,
Less of
financially,
a yeah. It's less of a cliff that you fall off. It's
yeah.
less of a like crack chasm that you could fall into. And I was gonna say too that we've seen guys like this in the past where we've had limited the Ted Cruz there. We've seen guys in the past where we've had limited sample on them and someone has taken them, but a lot of times when they'll fall into the later part of the first round there where it's like Anthony Simons was similar where it was just like, who is this guy? What's going on with this? I mean,
RJ
people,
Hampton.
yeah, and then Mitchell Robinson is another guy,
Yeah.
a big guy, but it's paid off for them. He's a really intriguing player. I don't know that I worry so much about him just getting like exposed, but I don't know. Next year's team, I don't think that there's going to be like undue pressure on him in a way that would make him look bad because I do think that they're going to be returning a lot of guys. Some guys just flat out can't play. Like, I mean, I was worried about Diallo for that reason when he came back because when I was watching a lot of his tape, I was just like, this guy seems really raw, and just like a lot of the questions I had about him came back to bite him. Actually, I'm less worried about that with Sharpe. But if he's top 5, I think if he gets in that 5 range, I agree with you. I think he's got to go. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about Built Bar, a longtime sponsor of NBA Big Board, and they have a new product that's called Puffs. If you haven't tried one of these, you're missing out. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite with some of the incredible flavors: yummy cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. They're delicious. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, including Puffs. 100% real chocolate, and they're low calorie, they're high protein. You replace your candy bars with these. They're better. A typical candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories. So go to built.com, scroll down to the macros chart. You'll be blown away. High protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carbs. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein. Compare that with a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, dozens of net carbs. Mint brownie, coconut almond. And for this month, white chocolate cookies and cream. They're all delicious. New flavors are coming all the time. At Built Bar, they are all about taste. They make it taste delicious first, then figure out how to make it healthy. And I don't know about you, but they pull it off every time. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off. Built.com.
Those sound delicious.
They're amazing. They actually really, really are.
Sounds too good to be true almost.
Yeah, too good to be true. Got to check out the Built Bar. Candy bar. It's good for you. It's awesome. He's Jake Mann of The Ringer. Really appreciate this conversation. We kind of went deep on several guys. We're going to go kind of speed round now through some other prospects up there. Best guard in this draft.
How it, like just in general, like
yeah, you want Jaden Ivey, you want Johnny Davis, you want Shaedon Sharpe.
There are a lot of the subcategories would steer me in different directions. I mean, like I said, the best like off the bounce, wiggly, like get to the rim guard. I think it's Jaden Ivey, the best catch and shoot guard in the draft. I mean, in terms of like a crafty shot creator, I think it's Johnny Davis has some of that like kind of crafty, toolsy, like Devin
Yeah.
Booker-y. I haven't seen this anywhere, but I feel like Devin Booker has to be his favorite player when I watch him like
Yeah.
face up and like rip through and all that stuff. In terms of like explosive, like defensive upside, I think Benedict, Mathurin, and like Kendall Brown both are could stand to be pretty good defenders at the next level. And then, I guess if you want to count AJ Griffin as a 2, I think he's probably the best catch and shoot guard in the draft. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I'm an Ivy guy. I mean, if you're asking me who's the first guard off my board, if I'm
Guard, period.
drafting, yeah, it's Ivy. I think that like everybody at this level, I have concerns. I'm not. We're billing him as a combo guard. I'm not sure that he's all the way there yet. He gets a little bit tunnel vision. I think the athleticism, the explosiveness, combined with that gear that he gets into, where he wants to take over games. I think he's going to figure it out. I also just, I'm not a big, gene guy. I'm not like Mr. Skip Bayless, what have you. But I do like players that their parents are coaches
Oh
and,
yeah.
worked with them. His mom is former WNBA player, then an NBA coach, and now a women's basketball head coach as well. I think that all is helpful to me. I like Johnny Davis. I'm a little bit concerned about his low volume of shooting threes and like what's up with that a bit, because I think that's going to have to be a big part of his game in the NBA to kind of reach his level. Mathurin to me is the 3 and D is great. It's everything in between that I question, right? Like he is your prototypical like shoot threes, athleticism, defense, but his creativity off the bounce and his ability to score in anything other than sort of straight line drives that's when you start to see him roll out of his depth a bit, and that concerns me a little bit. I'm an AJ Griffin guy as well.
Yeah. What do you think about
And
him as a creator, though? Do you see that? I mean, that is a question mark, I think. Is he limited
it,
there? Is it?
Yeah, it's so tough because of the team that he's on, like you said, where you've got kind of 3 guys playing kind of de facto point guard on this team, and Paolo being a playmaker as well. It seems like his role on this team is to spot up and shoot the basketball. So we haven't really seen that as much. Got to go back to high school. All the injuries. I mean, the injury thing to me is by far the biggest red flag. Is there something to the fact that he's run into so many injury issues? It could be a fluke. He could be fine going forward. He's going to be a guy for sure that if you see him slide on draft night when the NBA teams got the medicals, there was something that they think could be a long-term issue, like Michael Porter Jr. or somewhere else that starts to slide him. I know every scout that I talk to, they're like, I'm going to reserve my opinion on whether he's a top 5 pick till I see the medicals. And that seems to be the biggest question. But he's young too, and I think that's another thing that he's a little bit younger than some of these other prospects.
I really worry about something Jonathan Charks and I talk a lot about is like, where does your easy stuff come from in your game, and
Yeah.
and does everything else kind of ripple out from there, because that's what the NBA game is about. Every
Right.
star
Mm.
has like a simple proposition: I get buckets this way. If you're going to have star upside, when I watch Davis, I'm like, he's a crafty scorer. I just don't know. Sometimes I'll see him. Sometimes you can have such insane craft and skill and like mentality, like Booker is a good example, that you can
Yeah.
get to your shot pretty consistently. I see him working a little harder than I would like at times to get his shot. I was going to bring up to you, like, I know Ty Ty was a big recruit before he came to Kentucky, so this isn't a biased thing, but I feel like in terms of like a dribble pull-up shooter, Ty Ty's touch has really impressed me this year. We've gone to the point where I've been like, don't take that too. Like every time he takes any kind of pull-up, even out the 3-point line, I like it. I'm more confident about him as a shooter and a dribble shooter than I was in the past.
Yeah, Tai by far the most polarizing guy. He's been at 10 on my board, and he's been at 25 on my board. And
25. Yeah. Wow.
yeah, I mean it's he is definitely a guy that scouts see exactly what you see, or they kind of look at his frame. They wonder a little bit about his durability, how he's going to hold up. He also is the oldest freshman in this class, and
Mhm.
so you're taking that somewhat with a grain of salt. Obviously, he hasn't really gotten a lot of opportunities to be the lead guy there because Severe Wheeler, when he did, I think he had a 17 assist, like in one of those,
In
in one of
eruption.
those games. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was awesome. It really interesting. I think that after the guys that you mentioned, Mathurin, Johnny Davis, AJ Griffin. Kendall Brown is another guy that's a bit polarizing, and offensively, I totally get it. Defensively, the athleticism and his intelligence, I think, as a basketball player, I think he actually really sees and feels the game in a way that I kind of feel like he's going to figure it out. I think I take the Baylor guys, both him and Sohan, a little bit with a grain of salt because of what they're young freshmen in a much kind of older setting and team with championship aspirations. I think they're asked to play a role and they do it and they do it well.
Yeah.
But they're not asked to do more. I'm not sure that maybe that's what makes Kendall Brown look good is that he's not asked to do more.
Right.
Frankly, I mean, you can go both ways, but I'm a Kendall Brown guy. And then we didn't talk about this guy, Keegan Murray,
Yeah.
who from a just who's having the best season in college basketball. He's one of two or three guys that you're saying he's had the best season in college basketball. And I mean, it's in everything. I mean, this Iowa team is nothing without him, but he carries them on their back, and he's scoring, rebounding, blocking shots, steals, like hitting threes, driving to the basket. I mean, he's doing everything. He's also very old for a sophomore. He's almost going to be almost 22 years old on draft night, and so you got to take that you got to take that into consideration. This isn't your typical sophomore. He's
Right.
definitely older. Where does Keegan Murray fit in all this? From a production standpoint, he's been awesome.
I guess it depends on your confidence level of him, because I mean, I don't expect him to be like translate as like an initiator type. I see him as probably a rotation level player, most likely. But if he's attacking off the catch, I mean, the 3-point shooting numbers were a little better than I had remembered. They were up a little bit,
I
but
think he's up to like 37, 38% now.
yeah, he's got. I've watched him like try to attack bigs off the dribble. I'm a little bit more confident about him as like playing off the catch. And then I guess the question for a lot of these guys who have questions of that nature is the defensive upside. Can they provide, because he's shown a broad skill set, like we've talked about, like he can provide all these different things and give you value without punishing you with like inefficiency. If the defensive question, can he stay, if he can keep himself on the floor defensively and then provide you like just nickel and dime you with like as a well-rounded player. Yeah, but he strikes me as more of like a 10 to 20 type player in a normal draft. Top 10, because I don't know about, but of course, on the other side of this, you've been doing this a long time. You know that like you fall into a pitfall whenever you start to think about this is the type of player that I should take here. Like, or, you'll see players reach in that 7, 8, 9, 10 range. He strikes me as more of a like high floor. I don't know about star. Like I wouldn't go into that level with him. But he's a really, well-rounded player. We've seen it.
You talked about Jalen Duren a little bit, also one of the youngest players in this draft. One thing that's interesting, is I can't remember. I went back and looked at this, and I can't remember the number now. But that centers being drafted in the NBA draft is obviously there's been a trend. It used to be, I'm old enough to sort of remember that you take Greg Oden over Kevin Durant because you always take a franchise center over everyone else. And I as much as the Blazers were pounded for that, that was the conventional wisdom for almost every general manager at that point. And Bill Simmons and I got into huge debates about it because I was also a big Kevin Durant guy. I liked Kevin Durant better, but I still was in that draft mindset of you take a franchise center over everybody else. This is a draft that's really interesting in that wings are by far the most coveted position in the NBA and what teams are hunting in the draft, and we've seen that the last couple of drafts. But this draft is just loaded with big guys. It just is, and less so with wings. And so you've got Chet and Paolo, Jabari. I mean, whether you want to call him a big guy or not, he's not a wing. I don't think Jabari Smith's going to be a wing. Then you've got Jalen Duren, who's coming in as well. You've got guys like Mark Williams out of Duke. You've got Walker Kessler who is putting up historic numbers as a shot blocker that we haven't seen in college basketball in the last 20 years. You've got Oscar Tshiebwe, who's putting up rebounding numbers that we haven't seen from anybody in the last like 30 years in college basketball. There's a lot of bigs, and we're not even talking about the international guys, where several other guys are, Ishmael Kamagate and others are coming in as well. It's interesting. The NBA teams are going to be forced their hand a little bit because the better players in this draft are taller. Duren, does he have a modern NBA big man game? He kind of looks more to me like how you would go draft a big guy 15 years ago.
He strikes me as in the template. I'm always careful to say that the template, not the exact comp of a Kongwu. He's a little taller than a Kongwu or a Bam, like somebody that is very twitchy, long, athletic. I mean, super raw offensively. He's nowhere near like the passer that Bam is, and Okongwu didn't get enough credit for how like smart a player he was coming out of USC. But and we're seeing some of those things with Atlanta now. But Duren is to me that type of player who can get out and pretty switchable. I could see him being a pretty switchable player at some point. If you put him on a team that has a lot of ball skills around him, like crazy wingspan, Memphis has really kind of come on recently.
Yeah.
And as you've seen that team, like their spacing and things clean up with different things that have happened for them. That's the template that he fits for me. Like because people compared a Kongwu to Bam, and I was like, he's not quite the same twitchy athlete. But Duren is. It's just he's not as. Of course, we didn't see all these things from Bam either. You had to kind of read between the lines in college. He was more of a run, jump, dunk, post up type player. We had no idea he could play that elbow creator type style. Maybe Duren could. He's maybe if you put him in a situation with two guards that can really score. If there's a team, maybe even OKC, that's an interesting one. Portland's an interesting one. That's where I am on Duren. He intrigues me a lot, to be honest.
Okay. Let's just talk because Kentucky's where your expertise is. Oscar Tshiebwe, does he have a path to success in the NBA? Obviously, he's a legitimate candidate for Player of the Year. Playing hard is a skill. I'm not sure there's anybody that plays more like their life depends on it than Tshiebwe does every night. And rebounding is a skill, and one of the box score stats that typically does translate at the next level, right? Like if you're a good rebounder in college, you tend to be a good rebounder in the NBA. Do you see a path for him, and would you at all consider him a potential first round pick? I'm not talking about lottery now, but just like anywhere in the first round, or is this no?
He's made me eat crow a lot over the past year. I'll be honest. When Cal wanted him the first time, I didn't really know a lot of those like micro skill details about him, I think. And those are the things that have made me look dumber and dumber as time has gone on. I just saw a bruising. Cal's attracted to these types of players. Like I had somebody joke with me that like Cal, if he could, would go down like the NFL combine and just look at the times and sizes, and just that would be it. He likes to beat you up. He likes to play defense. He wants to grind. And that's what I saw. But like with Oscar, I see him and I just think I can tell you what I think his weaknesses are. I mean, obviously the size thing is an issue. I've compared him a lot to, he reminds me of like what Tyler Hansbrough did at the college level, where he would just work people to death. He would just kill you with easy buckets. He's got his face-up game has developed a little more over the past few months. Like he's starting to hit that like 15 to 18 footer. Could he extend that out, make like a pick and pop three? Maybe. I wouldn't put it past him. I worry about the speed, like as the speed of drop coverage increases, as it gets faster and faster against faster guards that are bigger. I worry about him on that front. I think we might see that in the tournament. And then he also just really struggles to pass when he draws too. Like he struggles to see it coming. You don't see that a lot with like guys that play soccer growing up. I thought he'd be a little better at it, but he's very slow at like recognizing it and passing it out. And he just doesn't have a lot of craft around the basket. And yet he scores a lot. It's an interesting thing. So I keep underestimating him. If I were him, I would come back because he's going to make an incredible amount of money here. He is, Chad, he is like unbelievably popular in the state of Kentucky. So those are what do you see him as an NBA player? I'm curious to hear from your side.
Yeah, I think the Tyler Hansbrough comp is is a really great one. I think Oscar's longer than Tyler Hansbrough. I think not only was Tyler undersized, but I don't think there was any positive wingspan there at
Right.
all, which just sort of makes it different. And Tyler probably a little bit more skilled offensively than
Hmm.
Oscar was. But if you're talking about a guy that just drives you nuts to play against because of how hard they go at you and grind at you every moment, I think that's actually a really great comparison. Like 80% of his success was effort,
Hmm.
and just sort of toughness. And and look, Hansbrough carved out he got drafted too high, but he stayed around in the league for a bit. I agree with you that this is probably a case where now that he's gotten the permission or ability to get NIL money, that it makes a lot of sense for him to come back. I don't think his draft stock goes anywhere next year. It's probably whatever it is this year. It's probably exactly the same, next year. And
Yeah.
so coming back and enjoying being beloved in Kentucky and playing such a dominant role where he's definitely most likely going to be somebody that comes off the bench to give you some energy and rebounding and toughness on a given night in the NBA. That's like probably his max out role. Yeah,
Where do you?
I agree with you. I think this is an example of a guy that just comes back because the
Yeah.
downside is so low, but there's a lot of fun upsides about staying in college for him for a year and getting another bite at a potential national championship.
Yeah, I think you have to just start kind of like reading between the lines and saying like, can we see him growing? Do you see him like spatially, his like spatial recognition growing? Do
Could
you see his touch growing? It could, yeah.
yeah
And
yeah
could you see him? I don't see him as like an elite rim protector because he doesn't really block things at the rim. He kind of catches them early, like he's sort of that type of player. And it's like, is Isaiah Stewart a lot better than him? I've found myself wondering about that. It's like Stewart, I think, is a little longer.
yeah.
Stewart has like a 7'5" wing.
So
He's like
I
a
think it's like a 7'5" wingspan. Yeah, but
yeah,
it's that type of player. And but Isaiah Stewart was also a lot younger, and I think people, if Isaiah Stewart had been Tshiebwe's age, he wouldn't have not gone 16th in the draft.
yeah. I think he's somebody you pick him up, you kick the tires on him. I don't know that I would use a high pick on him because of the growth plate thing where we're talking about where can these skills expand. But he's fascinating because he just doesn't have any kind of delusions about who he is, and he just
Mm.
destroys you with that. He's just like, nope, I'm going to put my butt into you, baby hook, rebound, and he just wears people out. It's really he's fun to have on our team. I'll say that I've enjoyed him. I've enjoyed being wrong. That's what I always say about Kentucky guys. If I'm right, great, but if they prove me wrong, I win either way.
Last question for you. I'll put you on the spot here. Always like to hear like who's a secret J. Kyle Mann guy? Like who's a guy like all the guys we've talked about so far, everybody's talking about as being a top 10 guy. So this doesn't even have to be a top 10 guy for you, but is there a guy that maybe isn't getting the love that like when you watch him you think, hey, this guy would be considerably higher on my board than kind of the consensus boards that are out there?
It's hard because so many people are talking about it these days that it's like hard to find one that's that surprises people. I always like whenever we do our draft coverage, I'll like get down to my tiers and I'll be like, these are my like bargain bin DVDs. These are the guys like,
Mhm.
you go into Walmart and be like, oh wow, that was a good movie for $5.
Yeah.
I feel like Jaime Jaquez is an interesting player that I feel
Mm.
like is going to like buy into um he's the type of guy that is just going to put both hands on a roll and just like he's a smart player. He defends his ass off. I could see him being he could hit open shots if he play. He's just the kind of guy that's going to like give you value because he doesn't have any kind of like I said again, any kind of like delusion about who he is. That's just one that kind of comes off the top of my head. Do
That's a
you have?
great one.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
great one. Um, I have started to get. I actually kind of fell in love with Jabari Walker when he had that big game against Georgetown in the tournament, and I didn't pay that much attention to him coming in, and I saw that. Okay, I like 6'9", 6'10" athletic guys who can stroke the ball. I started watching him
That's
closely at
smart of you to
Colorado.
like that.
I started watching Colorado early in the season. I was a little bit disappointed. The shot wasn't falling. He was rebounding his butt off, and he put on like 15 pounds of muscle. And I started to change the way I started thinking about him, but I actually was less intrigued. His last 10 games, he has been on fire from three. He's averaging 20 points a game, shooting like 44% from three. He's averaging like 14 rebounds per 36 minutes a game. And he's 19 still. And, he's Samaki Walker's son. And I'm asking myself, everybody who has Patrick Baldwin still as a potential lottery pick, because he's a 6'10" guy who can shoot the basketball and space the floor. Jabari Walker is a much better athlete. He's a much better rebounder. They're essentially the exact same age. He didn't just completely destroy his freshman season the way that Patrick Baldwin did. He's playing in the Pac-12. This is one of these guys that I'm like, explain to me, to scouts, like why you would have Patrick Baldwin Jr. higher than Jabari Walker when the value proposition is quite similar, but Jabari Walker does so many other things better. And Patrick Baldwin was not, in my opinion, really great for Team USA and the under 19s. I can make all the excuses in the world for why his season didn't go the way it was planned, the injuries and playing in a very poor talent around you, and maybe asking him to do stuff that he can't really do. But yeah, I think Jabari Walker, if it was me right now and I was drafting between those two guys, I'd take Jabari Walker over Patrick Baldwin. I think
I
that's
think
probably somewhat of a hot take.
I think that's a pretty strong argument. Walker is somebody. I mean, Samaki Walker is a guy that was pretty big. I live in Louisville. He's a legend here, but and people have been really excited to watch him. But he's somebody that people hit me up about a lot. Like I hear a lot of people that I trust talk about Jabari Walker consistently, and I kind of use that sometimes to like, you think things and then you run them by the people you trust to find out if you're crazy. Sometimes they still tell you you're crazy and you kind of have to go with it. That was the way I was with like Zaire last year. I was like, I kept going to everybody. I was like, well, no one agrees with me. I guess I'm gonna have to dig in here. But Pat Baldwin, I saw him at EYBL in 2019 in person, and I came away just being like, that was just not, something just isn't right with him, because you kept hearing about him as a guy that could like catch and shoot and relocate at his size efficiently, and that's like, okay, yeah, it's 6'9", 6'10". That's very fun. That's a fun idea. I need to like dial in and sort of crystallize my opinion on Walker a little more, I think, before I can make that call. They could both end up being solid players, but I understand your argument there with Walker. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Yeah.
So I put him 26 on my board, and I think that was the thing that a lot of people were like most surprised at the board. Maybe Tre'Quavion Smith as well. Putting him as high as I did as well was probably somewhat of a surprise. But those are probably two guys that I've really warmed up to as the season's gone on, and especially I think it's really funny. Like sometimes sophomores, if they don't come out of the gate like red hot, like they're just dropped. Like they're just it's over for you, right? Like freshmen will, like Zaire and what will give you a long runway as a freshman, but if you're a sophomore or junior, like if you don't start red hot, you're over. And I think people need to go back and like watch what he's doing in Pac-12 play lately and maybe reevaluate.
Yeah, I think that the adaptability is something that I really, really look for in the draft, like a lot. I want to be able to, if I can, I'm not like smart enough to do it in most situations, but if I can witness that you're picking up on things and that you are learning, like that year 1 to year 2 thing is huge. If you kind of struggle year 1, it's like, okay, let's see if you learn, and if you don't, you're right. It can just like the benefit of the doubt is 0. Yeah.
And let's also remember he's 19. And he would be younger than Chet Holmgren, and a number of guys that are even freshmen in the state. He's younger than Ty Washington. So I think too, you hear sophomore, and it's there's a relative age difference here as well that makes a difference.
Yeah.
Hey, this was super fun. Really appreciate you coming on the show and
had a great
dishing
time
with me about the draft. Really great what you do, and for our listeners, if you haven't checked it out, Mann over at The Ringer. Great stuff.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It's an honor. It's an honor. Like I said, I've always enjoyed your stuff for a long time, and inspiration. And it's cool to get to do this, to get to talk to you.
All right, thanks so much. You're listening to Chad Ford's NBA Big Board on Locked On Podcast Network. We'll be back next week with Rafael Barlow, breaking down our top prospects to watch in March Madness. Aloha.